At 32 years old, Marcus Thompson was living in his beat-up Honda Civic parked behind a 24-hour gym when the thick envelope from Sterling and Partners law firm finally tracked him down. The letter had been chasing him everywhere, from his repossessed apartment to his ex-wife's place where he wasn't allowed anymore, to the mail forwarding service he could barely keep paid. He opened it right there in the front seat surrounded by trash bags holding what Louis had left and learned that his uncle, James Thompson, had passed away at 87. Marcus was mentioned in the will. The meeting was scheduled for 3 days from now. He hadn't seen his uncle in more than 12 years. Their final interaction had been an explosive argument at a family reunion when Marcus was 21, cocky, and convinced he was destined for greatness in real estate investment. James had told him he was foolish. Marcus had called James a washed-up failure living in the past. He walked out and never looked back. Now, holding that letter, Marcus felt guilt mixed with something he despised admitting, which was hope. His bank account showed 83 cents. His cell phone would be shut off tomorrow. He'd been surviving on gas station hot dogs and water fountain refills. If James had left him anything at all, even a couple $1,000, it might be the rope he needed to pull himself out. For years earlier, Marcus had been crushing it as a property flipper in Phoenix, making over $200,000 a year buying distressed homes and selling them for profit. Then he made the disastrous choice to partner with his buddy Kevin Mills on a massive commercial development deal. They were certain they'd found a gold mine, an abandoned shopping plaza they could transform into luxury condos. They spent $600,000 of investor money in 14 months. The project collapsed. The investors filed lawsuits. Kevin, whose parents were wealthy and connected, escaped without a scratch because he had structured everything to protect himself legally in ways Marcus never understood when signing the contracts. Marcus, though, got stuck with the entire financial disaster. His credit was annihilated. His assets were taken. His wife divorced him. His family, especially his older sister Rachel, had offered to help exactly one time before completely cut him off and calling him a lost cause. The offices of Sterling and Partners sat on the 8th floor of a glass tower in downtown Phoenix. Marcus showed up 15 minutes early wearing his only dress shirt that had been wadded up in a garbage bag for weeks. Sitting in that waiting area, he felt the old familiar shame burning in his chest. He didn't fit in places like this anymore. When they called his name, he was brought into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Already seated at the long table were 3 people. His sister Rachel in an expensive pantsuit with a look of complete disdain on her face. Rachel's husband Todd checking his Rolex and looking bored. His cousin Brian, who owned a construction company and drove a Mercedes, he mentioned constantly. And at the head of the table sat attorney David Sterling, a silver-haired man in his 60s wearing wire-rimmed glasses. Marcus took the only empty seat, and Rachel didn't even glance at him. Todd actually grimaced like Marcus smelled terrible, which was probably accurate after sleeping in his car. Attorney Sterling opened a leather portfolio and began reading. To my niece Rachel Thompson, James left his antique watch collection valued at around $8,000 and his carpentry equipment. Rachel nodded like she expected more. To my nephew Brian Thompson, James left his 1968 Ford Mustang currently in storage. Brian grinned and said that's a sweet ride. And finally, to my nephew Marcus Thompson, Sterling continued looking directly at Marcus. I leave all my real estate holdings located at 729 Blackwood Drive, including the primary building, all additional structures, and the 15 acres of land. The room went completely quiet. Then Brian started laughing like he couldn't believe it. Wait, the Blackwood property? That condemned dump? Rachel leaned back, shaking her head with this cruel smirk forming, and said, "Oh, this is priceless." Marcus, do you even know what Uncle James just dumped on you? Marcus's mouth was dry. He had no clue what they meant. Sterling folded his hands and explained that the property in question was an early 20th century industrial facility that had been sitting empty for roughly 35 years. It was structurally dangerous, had 0 working utilities, and the county had filed a lien against it for $28,000 in overdue property taxes. If that lien wasn't paid within 60 days, the county would take possession of everything. Todd actually burst out laughing, this nasty sharp sound, and said so. He left Marcus a building that's going to cost him money. He obviously doesn't just avoid losing it. That's absolutely perfect. Rachel leaned in with her eyes full of vicious amusement and said, "You're homeless, Marcus. You're broke. And now you own property you can't even afford to tear down. Congratulations. I hope you enjoy sleeping in a death trap." Brian grabbed his jacket and stood up saying, "Good luck, buddy. Try not to fall to the floor," and they all walked out still laughing and mocking him. Marcus sat there frozen, staring at nothing. Attorney Sterling waited until the door closed completely. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a separate sealed envelope and said quietly, "Mr. Thompson, your uncle left very specific instructions that I was only supposed to give you this after the others had gone." He slid it across the polished table. It had Marcus's name written in shaky handwriting with the words "Open in private." Marcus's hands were shaking as he tore it open. Inside was a handwritten note on old yellow paper and a single tarnished brass key. The letter started with Marcus. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and your sister just made herself look like an idiot. I know what they think about you. I know what they think about the factory. They're wrong about everything. 35 years ago, I locked up Blackwood for a very specific reason. I've been covering the property taxes from a separate account to keep the county away, but I stopped 6 months ago intentionally. I wanted the pressure on you. I wanted you desperate enough to actually go inside and look around. There's something in that building I need you to discover. Something I couldn't trust Rachel or Brian with because all they see is money. You see opportunities, and you solve problems. You think like an entrepreneur like I used to. The key opens a main entrance. Go to Blackwood. Go to the north section of the building. Find the office space. Behind the metal filing cabinet, against a brick wall, there's a loose panel. Pull it. What you find behind there will either ruin you or save you depending on who you become. I'm betting you'll surprise yourself. Don't let them beat you, Marcus. Make me proud. Uncle James." Marcus sat there for what felt like forever, just staring at that brass key. Outside, the sky was turning dark and heavy clouds were rolling in. He had no money, nowhere to go, no backup plan, but he had this key and a dead man's faith that he mattered. He stood up, put the key in his pocket, and walked out. He had absolutely nothing to lose anymore. The drive to Blackwood took Marcus almost 3 hours, heading west through back roads that were cracked and neglected. His GPS stopped working 40 minutes outside Phoenix, so he had to use a gas station map and vague memories from childhood visits he'd tried hard to forget. He finally found Blackwood Drive, which was basically invisible, swallowed up by overgrown desert brush and chain-link fencing half fallen down. His Civic scraped against rocks and debris before the path opened into a massive clearing, and there it was. The factory was enormous, a sprawling 2-story industrial complex made of red brick and corrugated metal with broken windows, and a roof partially collapsed on the western side. Graffiti covered the lower walls. Sections of the building looked ready to fall over. It looked like something from an apocalypse movie. Marcus turned off the engine and just sat there staring. This was his inheritance, this rotting industrial corpse. He thought about Rachel's laughter and Brian's mockery and felt the crushing reality settle on his shoulders. He had no money for the lien, no money to fix anything. Couldn't even rent a motel room. The only place to sleep tonight was here in this collapsing nightmare. He grabbed his flashlight, pulled on his worn jacket, and got out into the heat. The main entrance was a massive rolling metal door rusted halfway open. Marcus squeezed through the gap into darkness. The smell was overwhelming: rust, chemicals, rotting wood, and something sharp that made his eyes burn. He turned on his flashlight, and the beam revealed a cavernous space. Old machinery sat in rows covered in dust and bird droppings. The concrete floor was cracked and stained. Metal beams hung loose from the ceiling. He found the north section after searching for 30 minutes, moving carefully around debris and holes in the floor. The office area was a maze of small rooms with broken desks and shattered glass. He found the metal filing cabinet, exactly where his uncle described, pushed against exposed brick. Marcus grabbed the cabinet and pulled. It scraped across the floor, revealing the wall behind it. He ran his fingers along the brick and found a loose panel, a section that shifted when he pressed it. He pulled hard, and the entire panel came free, revealing a dark space behind the wall. Marcus aimed his flashlight inside, and his heart stopped. It wasn't a hiding spot. It was a vault, a small room carved into the building's foundation lined with shelves, And on those shelves were file boxes, blueprints, binders, and equipment he didn't recognize. In the center sat a workbench covered with prototypes and technical documents. He stepped inside and opened the nearest box. Inside were patents, dozens of them, all filed under James Thompson's name between 1972 and 1990. Solar panel efficiency systems, water purification modules, industrial air filtration designs. His uncle had been an inventor. Marcus pulled out another box and found correspondence, letters from companies offering to buy James's patents, negotiations, contracts. One letter from 1984 was from a corporation called Envirotech Industries, offering $4 million for 3 specific patents related to industrial filtration. Attached was James's response written by hand that just said, "Not interested." Another letter from 1986 showed attorneys threatening litigation. The final document was a court settlement from 1988. Envirotech had sued James, claiming his designs violated their intellectual property. James fought for 2 years and lost. The judgment forced him to stop all commercial manufacturing and pay $550,000 in legal costs. That's why he abandoned everything. That's why he walked away. But Marcus kept digging and found the original patents still valid, still active, still legally his uncle's property. Patent 7,412,901 for advanced filtration systems filed in 1979. Expiration date 2026. It was still protected. Marcus sat down hard on a crate, his mind racing. If these designs were valuable enough to fight over in the 80s, what were they worth now with environmental regulations exploding and green technology booming everywhere? He heard noise suddenly from outside the building, car doors slamming, voices echoing. Someone was here. Marcus killed his flashlight and moved to the doorway listening. He heard Rachel's voice calling out Marcus. "I know you're here. I saw your pathetic car outside." Then Brian said, "This place is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Why are we even bothering? Because Rachel answered our idiot brother is probably squatting here, and I want to make an offer before he screws this up worse." Marcus climbed out of the vault and met them in the main factory space. Rachel had her phone out using it as a flashlight. She saw him and said, "There you are. God, Marcus, you look worse than I thought possible." Brian stayed near the entrance, looking disgusted. Rachel smiled that same condescending smile she'd always used and said, "Listen, I'm here to help you. I know you can't handle the lien. I know you're living in your car, so Brian and I talked and we'll pay off the taxes, take this property, and give you $10,000 cash to restart somewhere else." Brian nodded and said, "It's extremely generous, Marcus. You should take it immediately." Marcus stared at his sister and said, "You want this property for $10,000? Rachel shrugged and said, "It's worthless, Marcus. It would cost millions to make usable. We're doing you a favor." Marcus asked, quietly, "What are you really after?" Rachel's expression hardened, and she said, "Fine, you want honesty?" Brian did research. This land borders the new Southwestern Development Zone. In 3 years, this area gets rezoned for commercial use, and this 15 acres becomes worth $5 million easy. We're offering you $10,000 for a $5 million asset, and frankly, you're too stupid to see the difference. Brian tried to stop her, but she kept going, saying, "Just sign it over, Marcus, take the money, or watch the county seize it in 60 days. Marcus smiled cold and humorless and said, "I'm not signing anything." Rachel's face went red, and she said, "You self-destructive idiot, you'll lose everything out of spite." Marcus said, "No, I'm going to lose nothing because this property isn't worth $5 million. It's worth 20 times that, and you have no idea why." He walked them to the vault entrance and pulled the panel open, showing them the hidden room. Rachel and Brian stared speechless. Marcus held up his phone, showing photos of the patent documents, and said, "What's in here are active patents for environmental technology that Envirotech has been using without license since 1990. I already contacted a patent attorney this morning. He estimates I can sue for $70 million in infringement damages or license these designs for $3 million annually in royalties. Either way, I'm keeping the factory." Rachel's mouth moved, but nothing came out. Brian grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the exit, saying, "We need to leave right now." But Rachel stood frozen, staring at Marcus. Her younger brother she'd mocked and abandoned and written off completely. She whispered, "You can't prove that." Marcus said, "I don't have to prove it to you. I have to prove it to a court, and I have 35 years of documentation that says I'm right now, get off my property." They left without another word. 18 months later, Marcus stood outside the fully renovated Blackwood Innovation Center watching a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The factory had been transformed into a clean tech research facility and museum. The lien was paid with the settlement money. Envirotech had agreed to $12 million in back royalties plus annual licensing fees of $2.8 million. Marcus had used the money to restore the building and create a foundation supporting young inventors. He consulted for green technology startups, now helping them patent and protect their work. He lived simply in a small house nearby, but he slept in an actual bed with actual peace. He cleared his debts, fixed his credit, and reconnected with the few family members who mattered. Rachel had tried suing for a portion of the patents claiming family rights, but the case was dismissed immediately. Brian stopped all contact entirely. In his office, Marcus kept his uncle's letter framed on the wall next to the brass key. On difficult days, he'd read it again, the part that said you see opportunities and solve problems. And he'd remember that the most valuable thing anyone can inherit isn't property or money or patents. It's the belief that you're capable of more than your worst moments suggest. Sometimes that belief comes from someone who saw your potential when you couldn't. And sometimes what everyone mocks you for receiving becomes exactly what saves you. You just have to be brave enough to open the door and step into the uncertainty. Because that's where real value hides, waiting for someone willing to look.